Tonight we have a special project in mind for the Munro family history. We are doing this on July the 17th, 1994, and our hope is to take a number of the stories we have heard all of our lives as children and put them on videotape so that we can have something to remember these stories with for many years to come. So we have assembled here Aunt Mildred and Eileen and Dad and June, a couple of the younger Munros right here who don't remember too many stories, but we're going to try to get in place some of the many stories that we've heard over our childhood and adult lives. Okay, we're all ready now to do some storytelling here. So we talked a few minutes ago about your parents, and maybe you could tell us a little bit about, you mentioned your grandparents, the Macaulays, lived with you for a while. Do you remember that?
That's up here. Remember that, Eileen?
What?
Your grandpa Macaulay lived with you up in Earton for a while. Did he not? Grandma and Grandma Macaulay lived. Well, talk about it.
Yes, they lived with
Well,
us.
talk to the machine.
They lived with us were there for a while. And I guess they kind of went around among the children, but I think they spent most of their time with Uncle Charlie and with our mother and Dad.
So were they sick that they didn't have a home of their own? Or?
I think they were.
There was no Social Security in those days.
Yeah.
People didn't have Social Security. You couldn't live independently.
And I don't know how old Grandpa Macaulay was when he died.
He's 87 years old.
Bill says he was
87.
87. I didn't remember.
So
I knew he was pretty.
He had a good memory.
He had a good
I
memory.
remember when he came down to he came down to our house, and my grandma had died, and he was a widower, and we walked down. I was 6, 7 years, 8 years old. We walked down to, that was 1926, and I was when they built a state road, and I walked down with him to the end of the street. We watched them build a road, and, so that was interesting. And the road was built there, and in 26, and the road was built with 35 cents an hour labor. And in those days, when they poured the cement, they had to leave it to cure 30 days before they could drive on it. Now it's just 3 or 4 days, fast drying cement. But the curing time of the cement was 30 days. So they covered the road with straw, and they left it set in there for 30 days. And you couldn't drive on it. They had to use the other roads.
Well, the cars were quite a bit lighter then, too. I guess it's just a different quality of cement.
Some cars are heavier. Cars are not heavier now. They were heavier then. Because they were like big old Buicks and Cadillacs and Lincolns, and they were tremendously heavy. Model T Fords were light, and light cars.
Now, you were, where was the homestead out in, when you were first growing up? What was the name of the area out west of town here, or toward Big Run?
No, Big Run.
Church Street.
You lived in Big Run first.
Church Street, Big Run, yeah.
Oh, okay. There where Grahams used to live.
Yeah, they gave that house away.
And I remember Grandpa Macaulay always called a garage a garage. Always said it was a garage.
I was just thinking.
Well, his time before I was born.
He was a pretty alert old man, though.
Grandpa Macaulay was?
Yes.
Well, she was quite forgetful.
Yeah, she was very
He's a
forgetful.
little man.
Oh, she got so mixed up, and they had to be so careful. In fact, when she and Grandpa Macaulay lived with us for a while, we were having a back porch built on the house when we lived in West Liberty there. And invariably, she was out sweeping that porch. She'd sweep their nails, everything down over the porch.
That was
They had to watch her. She just was. But
He was pretty short, you mean?
Uncle or Grandpa Macaulay was very alert.
He's a wiry little man.
But her mind
He's a
was
liar.
very bad.
He's a liar.
And,
Now, when did you move from Big Run to West Liberty?
We never moved.
well, we lived in West
We
Liberty.
lived from West Liberty first.
Oh,
We built
okay.
a house up in West Liberty. And moved down there to Big Run in 1920.
Yeah, but we lived on the farm before that.
I knew that. And
I was born in Earton.
I know it. Dad built a house up near.
Yeah.
Now,
built a house in West Liberty.
In West Liberty, yeah.
but West Liberty, now that's where you went to school
Yeah.
in your early years,
Yes.
right? And what was West
That's where
Liberty?
we went to school and to church.
That was right near here, right over the hill from here.
West Liberty was?
Here, the mines were down over the hill, and
Now-
West Liberty was up on top of the hill.
Now, Grandpa, your dad then, he worked in the mines?
He worked at the mines. He's a blacksmith
Blacksmith.
But
outside.
he wasn't
Oh,
in
okay.
the mines, it was out of the mine.
He worked
Okay.
in Earton, and then when Kramer mines were open, he went there to work.
Because
And
Kramer
in the
was
meantime,
the new mines.
Okay,
in
so
the
that was a good
meantime,
place
we
for
moved from West Liberty to a farm down
Oh.
by Williamsport.
That was the time.
We were down there hunting that farm one time.
Did you find that?
Never did find it. Never found it.
But we only stayed there. He was so disgusted with farming. He said he was going back, and
No paydays.
they were opening at that time. They were opening Kramer mines, so he said he was going back and see if he could get a job at the mines there at Kramer,
Oh.
Clifford, our oldest brother,
So
really
that was- he
talked
came
him
back
into
and-
that.
and got a job there, and we still had the farm. But in the meantime, they advertised it, and they were able to sell it in just a short
To
time.
get their money out of it.
And got their money out of it. So Mom and us kids, we stayed there on the farm until we started to school, to the country school.
So they sold the horses they had. The team of horses was Cap and Colonel. Named the horses.
And we had to walk about
Oh,
a
walks
long
no
way.
good.
There was,
And we were
there
out
was
there.
no school buses at that time.
We were out there this summer looking for that, and we never could find a darn place. The fly was there, and he knows where he knows, but I couldn't find it. I ran around there, hunting the place, and couldn't find it.
Well, could
We
have
were
been.
in Montoursville, but
Well, the land would have been the same, but they could have torn the house down.
no, the house is still there. It's still there.
It's
'Cause
a pretty good looking house.
We had to go quite a long alley from the lane, I guess it was called,
down the road.
to get to the road.
We just
house.
couldn't find it, that's all.
So every time we went to school, every place we went, we had to go up that long.
So you
Right.
really did have to walk a long ways to school, huh?
Oh, then we had to walk a long way to school.
And our mother
There
hated-
wasn't school buses and all
Our
that.
mother hated farm work, and she said, I don't know when I ever moved here. And Dad said, well, he said, if you'd have
Put your foot down.
If you'd have put your foot down, we wouldn't have come.
Oh.
She said, well, I couldn't have lived with you. Oh,
well, he was a
quite
black.
an experience.
Yeah,
Now, was the pay very good at Kramer? Was that one of the reasons?
Sure, it was good wages, union wages. And then at Kramer, the union wages, and they broke the union in 1926. And the Jacksonville Agreement come in and was cut the wages way down. But then and Kramer worked good all through the Depression because they had the northwestern mine for the Erie Railroad. So they made the mine coal for the Erie Railroad. So that time the Erie burned coal, so they had a market for their coal. So.
Mhm.
Anyhow, during the Second World War, they hogged the mine up and they finally shut it down in 1940.
That must have been the early 50s.
48 shut it down. I worked till 48.
I remember you coming home from the mine, though,
Oh,
so it must
sure.
have been after 48,
48.
the Kramer mine.
48 when it shut down, and I worked at last in 1947. I was top man, night shift top man, and
Now, what did then when you moved to Big Run, and that's really where you grew up
where
a
I
lot
lived.
of your years. And
lived there from the time I was 2 years old. I went to the service.
Eileen and Aunt Mildred, you went to nurses training in what year?
Yeah.
Remember that?
26.
1926.
Yes.
And now, where was that in?
I graduated from the
Maple Avenue.
yes,
Maple Avenue Hospital.
Hospital.
So your training was here in DuBois.
Yes, it was Maple Avenue Hospital. But in that time, though, there was about 4 months that we were taken to
Pittsburgh,
Philadelphia
Philadelphia.
for some of our training.
Oh, okay.
And then we came back and graduated from Maple.
Okay. And then Eileen, when did you start working at the post office? Was that your first job?
That's after you graduated from high school.
After I graduated from high school in 26, I worked several other little jobs, but I can't remember what I clerked in a store. A fella had a grocery store, and I clerked in that for a while, and then of course I worked at the post office, but I can't remember just what year it was.
27 you started there. And I remember they had an old...
Well, it was not that soon after I graduated.
They had a kind of old coal stove there. We used to go down with it in the morning, build a fire. Bill Depp was hurt in an automobile accident. He didn't work for about a year.
Now you were all
was postmaster.
You were all old enough to remember the Depression.
I guess so.
Yeah. How did that affect your family?
Old enough to remember what?
The Depression.
Well, the
Yes.
depression didn't affect us so bad because our dad had a steady job. Kramer worked all during the Depression.
And he was fortunate to be able to work all that time.
So the people who worked in the mine, they had a steady income, and
They were pretty steady, yeah. Of course, they cut the wages way down, you know. They had to work cheaper. And that was happening again.
Then let's after that, maybe we could go to when. Now, why don't you tell us, Dad, a little bit like when you met Mom?
Well, I met Mom on a blind date. we went down to Sheila Smith. She was going to Morris Bennett. So I had a car, and he didn't have a car. So he said, she said, you want to go out with, she was in the Lucille's had a class, and she said, you want to go out with a nice girl tonight? And I said, well, where we go? She said, we'll go skating on Rouseville. So we went over, and I had a 32 Plymouth coupe. So all four of us went over to Rouseville and skated down the skating rink. And that's where I met her. And then I went with her, then I finally married her.
Now, so when you married her, let's see, in 20,
That
not 20,
That was 39 when I went with her, and I first went with her, and I married her in 41.
Okay.
Married in 41.
Now, some things I think that would be interesting would be, of course, you went to the war. We can talk about that in a little bit. But, when the war news first came, that would have been something that would have shaken up the whole country in 41.
I was in the house in Big Run, and it was on a Sunday. And we heard the news about 1 o'clock. Pearl Harbor bombed. And said to myself, where in the heck is Pearl Harbor? I never heard of it. So the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. So then the Roosevelt came on that night, and they said a state of war resist between Japan and the United States. And then they started to show pictures on TV in the newspaper. There's no TV at that time, and they showed how the Japanese had bombed Pearl Harbor. And at that time, I never heard of Pearl Harbor.
Nobody would have. That's such a long ways away.
Islands. So they really caught us with our pants down, really did. And,
now, when you were drafted, and so,
I wouldn't have had to go if I had stayed in the mines. But that's neither here nor there.
if you would have stayed in the mines?
At the mines. I wasn't in the mines. I was working on
top.
dropping flats.
But that was a part of our economy that was necessary to keep going,
Yes,
the coal.
I had a job that was draft exempt.
Mm-hmm.
Jim was just how old when you went? So
He was about 3 months old.
6 weeks.
3 months old.
3 months old when you were drafted, you mean?
Yes, I went down to Altoona, and Aunt Lizzie was there. I remember her. She was there. She was a wonderful person, Dad's sister. And she was there to see us off.
Got a box of candy for you.
Yes, a box of candy.
Yeah.
And then,
You could handle candy, then you were nice.
yeah. Anyhow, she came to see us off. And they took us in a restaurant there and gave us a meal. It was
Aunt Lizzie was a very thoughtful person.
tapioca pudding and meat and just did potatoes and just give us a meal and send us off. And we went from there to Indiantown Gap. It was cold weather. We did in March.
And where did you do your basic training? And
Down in Camp Van Dorn, Mississippi.
it was a little warmer down there, I guess.
Very hot. Very hot. It was spring down there. And it rained a lot, and we had tar paper barracks and long tar paper shacks. And pardon me, got a cough. in Camp Van Dorn, Mississippi. And so was right near Macomb, Mississippi, 60 miles away. So that's where we went on meet. So I went ahead and leave from down there and come home at the end of basic training. And then from there we went down to Camp Maxie, Texas. Mildred and Lucille came down there to see me. So we were spending a few days down there.
Was that before you went overseas?
Yes, before we went overseas. Mildred and Lucille came down there, and they rode in the train. They remember how there was crowds. The crowd of soldiers wasn't going down and coming back. So we went back up to Camp Maxie, Texas.
That was a big event to get down to
That was right
Texas,
outside,
wasn't it, Mildred?
right outside of a little town called Paris, Texas.
Probably nothing much Paris-y about
They had
Texas.
a nice Gibraltar hotel there. They had nice hotels and nice restaurants, and they could get a nice breakfast there for 60 cents. I remember that's how cheap they was, because we wasn't making any money either. And 60 cents for a nice breakfast. And when they came down there, we stayed in the Texas hotel, little hotel there, for $3 a night. And the first sergeant there, Adcock, so I know him well, he's a nice guy. He sent me down to, he said, take a couple days and take a 3-day pass, a couple days, go down to Paris and give me a few things, and say, then come back up when the time's up. So I did, and I stayed down there. And when the time was up, I come back to the company, and he said, well, just take another 3 days off. Your wife's here. So I did. So I took 3 days, another 3 days, did 6 days off.
Mhm.
So then they went back.
Back going again.
Okay, well, anyhow, after we come back from, then Lucille and Mildred come down to Pittsburgh to see me one time. Lucille and Lois come down to Pittsburgh, and we stayed at a Fort Pitt hotel. And I come up and rode on the train, and the train was so crowded that night. The guy from Minersville, I don't know where it was, in Pennsylvania here, the big guy was Slim Marson. So we couldn't get down the train, so we wanted to get on up because we wanted to get up from Louisville. So the train was full, so we rode on the train out between the cars on the platform, and we were dirty. When we got home, we were dirty. And we got up to Pittsburgh. We got to Pittsburgh that way.
Well, a coal-fired locomotive, that'd be dirty.
Locomotive, and the foot was coming down, so we looked like we fired the engines on the job. But anyway, we got to the hotel and took a bath, and went on up to Pittsburgh, from Pittsburgh the next day on the bus.
What ship did you take? What port did you go out of when you went overseas?
I went out of Boston. On the USS Argentina. It was formerly of President Hoover. And they had 28 men in the stateroom. It was 2 little staterooms for a man and his wife and a little bath. And they had 2 little staterooms, and they had 28 men in those packed in there on bunks. And they were bunks 6 tiers high. And they gave us these paper bulk magazines, pulp magazines to read. So we trade them around. You couldn't do anything but lay in your bunk. And you go down to eat. And the kitchen was down in the bowels of the ship. And it smelled, when you went in there, it turned your stomach because it smelled so much of food. But it went down and we had 3 meals a day. Get up on deck and exercise a little bit. It was quite a thing.
Now, but wasn't that pretty, was everybody afraid to make the crossing because of
you
that?
weren't afraid. The torpedo hit that ship, you went down like a ball, like a stone.
They were trying for troop ships too, obviously.
They had 42 ships on that convoy and Washington submarine. At that time, that was 43. They had the submarine men was pretty well controlled.
Mm-hmm.
And they had airplanes with us, taking care of things. But it was risky, but and we got over there. We landed in the Havre.
What?
So we landed in England.
When did you get into England?
We got in there, I don't remember the date, but it was in October '43.
44, you mean?
44, and we landed in England in a place that went up by train up to Dorchester. And I remember the bars over there. All they had was beer, and they had this dark beer, and they called it P38 because you drink it. Had a lot of hops in it. You drink one glass, it's P38 times. They called it P38. So anyhow, we went up in the pubs there. There's always a place to go. Went to the pubs, and the bartender, they closed at 10 o'clock. It's strictly blackout, and they had the curtains on the doors and windows, And the bartender at a quarter 10, he hit the triangle there. He had the brass triangle. He hit that bong time jump, and that last drink was intended. That's the last drink. So, nobody get drunk in that beer because you couldn't know you had imagination, Dorchester, England. We were landed in Dorchester, and the place we landed. We went to this barracks where the British commandos had been in there before they left for the invasion. So when they left, they took their trench knives and they had all these straw ticks and just slit them open and scattered their star all over the floors. So we slept on it a couple nights, and then they come in and said, "Get this cleaned up." So we got fresh straw and filled the ticks and sewed them up, and that's where stayed for a couple weeks. And then we were over to France, across the Channel. And we crossed the Channel and went over by truck up to the front. The outfit there, the Germans had been there with convoys, with jeeps, with German jeeps, and tanks and so on. The Air Corps come in, American. We had the air control there, and they'd come in and bomb. And a lot of the guys were still in the outfits just where the bombs had hit them.
So you mean when you were driving along the road, you'd see a lot of German vehicles and bodies?
This stuff off the road, and we went through. And that's where the trucks and German trucks and convoys, they were just pushed off the road, and the bodies were still in them, of course. And that was that. And we went up on line, and line was up in the Hurtgen Forest, up at those balls where the balls caught us. So we went up there, and the 16th of December, the Germans attacked us, and they had a big. We were in a hole with there was dirt over the doors and stuff, and we piled dirt on it. So on the 16th of December, I was in there. My bunkmate was my Jeep driver was Corporal Collins. I was a staff sergeant. I had two squads, and so the Germans come in there and put an artillery barrage. And of course, we stayed in the ground there, and the trees had just broke the trees. The shells come in, broke the trees, but we weren't hurt. We had the very, very light casualties. Then we got out of the holes, and the next morning, and the Germans were coming, but they tried to run through there, and we had mortar fire, and we just, mortar fire usually would use 3 or 4 increments to put the mortar out, but we just fired them on the propelling charge, up like that. We could hear the Germans yell when they'd hit. We just adjusted fire, So they didn't come up there. But I had one guy named of Purdue, and he was a southern boy, a mountaineer. And so we told him that one time we were going to go back. And we told him to get out, we had to move back. So we threw thermal grenades in the mortar to destroy them so they couldn't use them. And this Purdue, he didn't come out of the hole there, and he was in the hole. I said, "Come on back here with us." And he wouldn't. He waited. Finally, he jumped out of the hole, and the Germans were down there in a machine gun, so we lost him. But then we went back to the line and we brought up tanks, our 90 tanks, and the Germans were up there with tanks of their own. But they put fire on them, tank fire, and the Germans they stopped. I was in a guy with a little in a hole, a little guy up there dug in, and nothing to keep your head down. So this guy was Dan Abel. We called him Hardy Abel. He was crying, poor kid, about 18 years old, and so the tank fire was. We kept in our hole, and they kept firing up ahead over their heads. They keep your head down, and so nobody needs to tell you that, but you kept your head down.
Yeah, you wouldn't want to put your head up.
So anyhow, we got out of there. So when after the balls.
You told me one time, a long time ago, that you had a time at one point where you had dug in and you had a Jeep. You wired it from a Jeep battery, so you had light inside.
Before the balls, we had on the Jeep battery, we had a little light fixed up on it. You could sit in there and read. And I remember the book I was reading. I had to leave there. Never seen it again after that.
Yeah.
The paperback in Bed We Cry by Ilka Chase. I never did see that book again. I left it there. The Germans got it.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
They're giving more support to the
John.
rifle company.
Hey, John. That time.
Listen, Eileen.
Okay, now we're ready. Start
We're
over
giving
again.
more support to the K company. So they were up ahead, and we were giving more support from the back. So we come up to this brick house, looked like a house of Roy McCown, Big Run, that little house. And so anyhow, we come up there, and we went upstairs, and we figured somebody that told us, my radio operator. So anyhow, we come upstairs in this house, and I said, "There's somebody down there in the basement." I didn't want to be down there up there with guys, shoot me. So I went to the head of the stairs, and there's two Germans down there with two women, and so they had their boots off. He said, "Back, I couldn't find his boots." So I just had an M1 rifle. I just snapped the safe off and click. And I said, "Get the rifle, get the boots on, put them on." So boy, he found the boots in a hurry. And so they come out and we took them prisoner. That was it.
Now we treated the prisoners pretty good, but you said the Germans became more and more cruel, and so the Americans.
As the war went on, they became more treated prisoners better. But we were up near Malmedy when the Germans captured about 80 guys there, and that was before I was doing the balls, after the business of the balls. And they captured about 80 guys there. And so they thought they'd surrender. The guys laid down their arms and everything. And after that, I said, "I'd never surrender."
What did they do to those 80 guys?
They come back there, and they backed up a truck, and they had a canvas over it. They raised the canvas up, and they had a guy in there with a machine gun. And machine gun, and that made the GIs mad. So they machine gunned these guys and killed most of them. A few of them escaped to tell about it. And they found the bodies a couple months later when the snow lifted. They got the snow. They killed a lot of guys, about 70 guys there.
Some of them just pretended they were dead, were
A
wounded.
few of them got away by crawling and running, But the Germans, the Malmedy massacre that was, and the Germans were strictly.
They were hated after then for sure.
They hated the guys, and that caused the Germans a lot of lives because the guys did shoot prisoners. But it was terrible. Now the story of June and I met June and married her. Good thing to happen to me, and so I knew her for years. I knew her husband and worked with him. So she called me up one day and said, we talked. I said, "Well, let's go out to dinner," and we did, and it just turned out that we got married. So.
Well, you've been a good match.
She's a good girl. So.
She puts up with a lot of grief, Dad. She has to be good.
And he probably puts up with a few things too, don't you?
How long were you a widow, Jim?
Well, let's see. What year did I?
85.
85 until 89. 89, March the 18th.
Yeah. So both of you quite a while. Seems like those are times when time goes by real slow.
Yes. Definitely.
Well, Aunt Mildred, let's ask you a couple questions. I was going to have you talk a little bit about when Dad came home from the service, because I remember one time we were talking about this, and you had a lot of insight in it. You knew Dad was coming about Christmas time, and you came home on what ship, Dad?
They come on 29 December.
What ship did you come?
Indian Town Gap.
Oh, okay.
I come home on the Enterprise, aircraft carrier. The terrible storm we left England, and we had to didn't turn back when he held up, and the ship would go down like that and up, and it's a big ship. And I'd stand the fantail and see these waves. I think boy's going to sink it, but it didn't. So when I come home, we didn't know where we were coming to. We come to Indian Town Gap to off the ship, and there were German prisoners there. They had steak dinner for us, and really nice setup, you know. So they said, you guys are on about the 26th, 24th, 25th, 3rd. They said, you guys stay here over Christmas. We'll get you discharged right after Christmas. So okay, so we did. So and they had that on Indian Town Gap, on the post there, they had all kind of these service clubs. They had chicken turkey dinners, you know, and you could go around and eat. So we had a good time there. So then after Christmas, they got busy and discharged us. I was discharged the 29th of December, and we didn't know where we were coming to. So I got on a train, a troop train, and they took us up to, they left me off in Ridgeway. So I seen a guy there with an old Chevy cab, taxi cab. He painted an old Chevy painted yellow. And he said, I said, how much it take me to Du Bois? I had a couple berries. He said, $8. So he took me. Olin brought me home, but he didn't know when that's coming.
Oh.
So I rode down to 215 West Main Street, and he let me out for $8.
$8 would be what? 2 days? A day's wage?
Well, no,
2
$8.
days.
$8 you're getting more than $8. You're getting about $12 a day at the mines. But that's $8.
Yeah.
I was only getting $96, $100 some dollars a month. $118 a month.
At that point, it was worth it to get home.
Oh yeah.
Jim didn't know you. He didn't remember you very well.
Oh, he knew me. We went up when I got home. I went up. He was in bed. I picked him up. He was kind of staring. Then we went downtown. I got acquainted with him.
We were living on South Main Street there when he came home.
That's right up by the brewery.
Yeah.
That
In
house.
front of the brewery.
By the plant, not the brewery.
Oh.
We waited for several days.
Oh,
You didn't
we
even
went to
know
meet
exactly when he
several
was going to
we didn't
come.
know when he was
Neither
coming.
did I.
Lorette came up and we went to meet two different trains and so went all around to
Didn't know
think
last with it.
he'd come in because we weren't sure.
Well,
how
so
he
much
was coming.
confusion, and so didn't have the telephone communications you do now, and so it was a good bit different.
I think I called you from Indian Gap before I was down there before I came home. Didn't I call home from Indian Gap? Television program, The Bridget or Megan. We crossed that on the third day, and the bridge was a big railroad bridge, and the Germans were on the other side, but they had cleared the bridge before we got over there, so it was shaky. And the Air Force was trying to bomb it. These Spitfires, ME-109, they'd come in there and try to skip bomb it. They'd miss it. So we went over there and we went out in the old railroad station on the other side of the river. And anyhow, the Germans were trying to bomb it. And after we were over there, we were in the railroad station. Then we went up to on the hill, above the hill. On the hill, we were with the rifle company, and that's when they brought the 90s, the first 90s I'd seen. The second 90.
90 was a what?
90 millimeter artillery piece. And before that, we only had a 75. It was a low muzzle velocity, and the tankers hated them because they'd shoot a German tank and they'd bounce off them and they wouldn't penetrate the tank unless they hit them on the belly, underneath when they were going up the hill. So a lot of tankers were killed. I wasn't in the tanks, thank God. And anyhow, they brought out, they just had those 90 millimeter artillery pieces, and the 7 German tanks come over the hill there to knock us out. All we had was rifles and machine guns and mortars, and the tanks lined up when they knocked out 7 of them. Just dip. That was a new weapon, the 90 millimeter artillery piece.
So they were all surprised, naturally.
They were surprised, but before, how they ever got that before the war, the artillery, the 75 millimeter gun was on these tanks was absolutely useless, unless you could knock out a truck or anything like that. But
I mean, the 90 millimeter guns were on our tanks.
They were on the tank later on at that time.
Yeah, right.
We saw them down the balls. We saw a couple of them. But that's the first time I seen when they bought it.
Was it a special armor-piercing kind of shell or something?
Armor-piercing, high velocity. That's the main thing. See, that 88 was a high-velocity shell, and that was death.
The Germans 88, you mean?
Yeah, German 88.
Yeah.
That was. So they were way ahead of us on that. And of course, in the air war, about that time, before that, the P-51 come in to serve an airplane which knocked it. That would escort the bombers cleared Berlin back, and they could shoot down the Me-109. So they were. Now Hitler had a jet fighter. He didn't have it perfected, so they were just getting at it. The Mustang P-51 was a great airplane.
Was that the one with the tiger on the front light?
No, that was flying. That was a P-39. So it was a P-51 was a high-speed airplane and a good airplane.
Like it.
It had a long range. That's the thing. See, before that, the airplanes they had didn't have enough range to go to the target and back with the bombers. The bombers had to come back by themselves, and the German Me-109 would just get on them like a pack of wolves. So they lost a lot of bombers. They lost 60 bombers going to Schweinfurt alone and back.
This is the Munro family residence at 602 Locust, the home of Mildred and Eileen Munro. Okay, this is July the 18th, 1994, and we're continuing our saga here of the Munro family history with Aunt Mildred and Aunt Eileen and some of the things that we're going to discuss today. We had mentioned last night when Dad was here about the war, World War II, and some of his experiences in the war. Maybe you could tell us some of the things that went on here at home that were significant to you while you were waiting. It seemed like, I'm sure for some time, that the war was going very badly for the U.S., especially the first few years.
Yeah, some worried times.
Yeah. The bulge was, Bill was, I guess, in that.
Now, you didn't hear from him for some time?
Quite a while we didn't hear from him. And then finally we got some of those letters, what were they called?
Where they would take a picture of them and send them to you?
That they wrote them, and then there was
They had to be
Censored?
gone over, before because
but it was quite a while that we didn't hear from him.
you had to be careful what you said in your letters. Well, he did too.
They were all censored, I guess.
We get pretty much upset when we would hear from him for a while.
Because you get awful nervous
Yeah.
about wondering where he was. Now
We were living there on South Main Street at the time.
Mhm.
And I remember him saying when he came, he said, why did you leave Big Run? He said, I liked it there. But it was more convenient.
He was sorry that Mama sold her house. He thought she shouldn't have.
But,
She should
Oh,
have
so
kept
while he was away at the war, the house down there was sold and you moved up here?
Yeah. see, your mother and Jim was living with us, and Mildred and I were both working up here. And,
So it was a long drive every day.
yeah.
So.
Although she seemed content after she got up.
Well, but we thought maybe she wouldn't want to come, but she did, and she was real happy too when she came.
Now, during those years, I know that you went to First Baptist here in Du Bois, and I think Pastor Hollywood was the pastor during the war.
Yeah, he must have been, yes, at that time.
And it was during that time that you remember that Mom was saved.
Well,
I don't know whether you remember that clearly.
That.
Mom and Eileen and I joined the church at the same time.
Yeah.
And then when my mother was here, though, during the war, do you have any remembrance of that? I know she'd go to church with you regularly, but you don't remember it clearly.
She and Jim lived with us while Bill was gone.
Uh-huh.
We all lived together.
What about Grandma Munro and my mother got along pretty well, you were saying last night.
Oh, yes, yes.
So while you were working, they were here at home.
Yes.
During that time.
On South Main Street then.
Mm-hmm. Grandma Munro was quite active right up until...
Oh, yes, she was.
She had taught school, for years, and she was.
And the Honey sisters lived next to us, and they always were interested in Jim. They said about seeing him looking out the window. Of course, they knew that Bill was in the service.
Now,
they were always nice to us.
What did the Hawneys do? What was their family business?
Pardon?
What was the Hawney family's business?
Well, they owned the brewery.
Right next door.
Right back of us, yes.
But you didn't go over to the brewery too often.
We didn't patronize it.
No, but we got a lot of old black smoke there.
Yeah.
Oh, our porches got so dirty because, of course, the brewery was running at that time.
But they were just so taken up with Bill, He was just
Jim.
Jim.
With Jim.
Just a little fella.
He would look, of course, our windows faced theirs, and they could see him in the window, And he was just about tall enough to stand at the window and look out. You can imagine Jim.
Now, Jim was born, of course, and I don't know whether you remember any interesting stories about him or Susie or I that we could talk about.
Well, that Mrs. Skidmore was at our house, wasn't she?
Oh, no. Not at that time. That was when Bill was born. I was working at the post office at the time, and Harv Eckelbarger was postmaster. And he knew that Bill had been called up to go to the service. And he said, and of course he knew Lucille was expecting. And he said, I just think it's too bad for that boy to have to go before that baby comes. So he said, I'm going to do something about it. So I don't know whether he did or not, but anyway, I think Bill was maybe deferred for a week or two. I don't just remember the exact time. And Bill was born then, before he went.
Well, Jim was born in January, and Dad left for the service, he said, in March.
What was that?
Jim was born in January.
Yes.
And then Dad left for the service in March, he said last night.
Well,
now let's talk a little bit about when Dad came home. Of course, you knew the war was over, but still, it took a long time, it seemed, for everybody to get home, a couple months.
Yes, I don't remember how long it was exactly after he got...
It was just after Christmas that he got home. But you were waiting for him, you just didn't know when he was going to get here.
We didn't know just when, because I remember Lorette came up, and she wanted to be there when he came home. And I can't remember exactly when he was discharged.
Well, I remember when Bill came home that he said, "Where is that baby? I want to see it." And he went upstairs and he came down with
it was in the evening that he got
over
home.
his shoulder. I can
Were
think.
you surprised when the taxi drove up?
Was
And
surprised when
You were surprised when the taxi drove up, and
Oh yes.
Now, hadn't
See,
you,
he got into Ridgeway or St. Mary's, Ridgeway, I guess, and then he had to get a taxi to come to Du
But
Bois.
we had gone up and, you know, waited to see him a couple
We
of
always
times.
met every train and every, thinking that he'd come in, and he didn't come. But the reason was that he came to they came into either St. Mary's or Ridgeway, and then he got a taxi and came from there.
but he just appeared at the door then, basically.
He was.
He just appeared at the door. You didn't know he was
Yeah,
coming.
we
And
didn't know for sure when he was coming. And I remember Jim was in bed, and he went upstairs and brought Jim down.
The shoulder. Can you imagine him bringing Jim now?
well, that would be a time when, you just stay. That'd be a night you'd stay up late and talk, I'll bet.
Oh yeah, we stayed up. We met every train and every
Worry,
bus.
you know, worry.
Of course, the trains were running into Du Bois at that time, and we weren't sure just how he was going to come. But then, like I say, it so happened that when he did come, he came in either into Ridgeway or St. Mary's. I'm not sure which it was. And then he got a taxi from there.
And they said he asked them how much they would charge him. What did he say?
I think $5.
No, $8.
40?
It was a small amount.
$8. I
Eight.
said last night $8.
We had some worrying times, you know, but boy, it was a happy day.
Well,
then
see,
when we
he
were
was
there.
gone during the Battle of the Bulge, and there was weeks that we didn't hear from him. Maybe we'd get a letter, but it would be a letter that had been mailed
Had
before,
gone over, you know.
or their letters, I guess, were all inspected or gone over. So it would be some time between letters, and
Some-
And I remember the day he left that I told Dr. Anthony that I wanted to go and to bid him goodbye when he was leaving. So he said, all right. So when I did come back, it was afternoon. And he said, well, I didn't think you'd be this long. Made me kind of mad. No, he didn't think he could have wasted that much time. But that meant a lot to us.
That's right.
And Aunt Lizzie was there. She always was so nice to all us kids. And she had a box of candy for Bill when he left.
not there, Mildred.
Huh?
She was in Altoona, and she was at the train in Altoona.
Oh, that was right.
Oh, so Dad went from here, Du Bois, down to
Yeah.
Altoona, and then
She
Aunt
was
Lizzie
at
met
the
him there.
That's right.
Because they went to Du Bois or to Altoona, and that's where when he finally went, then that's the way they went from out of Altoona.
Now, what about your aunts, Grandma's sisters and brothers? How many sisters and brothers did your mother have?
Well, she had two sisters,
Aunt
Aunt Lizzie and Aunt Phoebe.
Now, whose sister was Aunt Lizzie?
Aunt Lizzie was Dad's sister.
Oh, okay.
She never married, but she raised a son.
Oh,
Charles Munro's mother died at birth, at the time he was born. And Aunt Lizzie, she had never married, and she raised Charles. Of course, he was just like a son to her.
now did Grandma Monroe have any brothers?
Now this Aunt Lizzie was our dad's sister.
Mhm.
Oh yes, Mom had two brothers. She had Uncle
Charlie. And Uncle, what was the other one?
Charlie and Lem.
Huh?
Uncle Lem.
Oh, yeah.
Now, who was Uncle Sam, other than the government?
Sam.
Didn't you have an Uncle Sam?
I remember of an Uncle Sam.
Now, what about your dad's brothers and sisters? How many did he have?
Well, Dad had Uncle Arch and Uncle Charlie. I think that was all.
Aunt Lizzie.
Well, Aunt Lizzie was just,
He only had one sister.
no, he had Aunt Jean. She was married to Charles Martin, and and she lived in Altoona. And then Aunt Lizzie was in Altoona. Of course, she never married, and she worked at the hospital in Altoona.
Now, your own brothers and sisters, Clifford was the oldest, and he died young. What, did he have heart trouble?
Yes,
He had a heart.
He died
He had a
quite
heart
suddenly.
attack when he died.
And how old was he? About?
Oh, I really don't remember.
He was young.
Well, he wasn't real very old, no.
Was he 50, you think?
Oh, he might have been 50 when they...
Which one is that?
Clifford.
Oh, I think that.
Then Clifford married Ruth, and they had...
Clifford married,
Clifford married Alice
Oh,
Himes first,
and she was a pill, as far as I'm
and
concerned.
they were separated.
oh, I see.
And he married her. He met her when we went to live on the farm out by Williamsport. And he married her, and Mom didn't want him to marry her because she had an awful temper.
Oh.
She was fiery.
And, but of course he did. And he was married to her, and that would be Dick's mother.
Oh, okay.
And
So Mom really had to raise Dick then, more or less, didn't she?
yeah,
And then he married who next?
well, he married May Crawford.
May, right. Now, May was Ruth and Carl's mother.
Yeah. Ruth and Matthews.
Ruth and...
Oh,
Carl
Carl
and Ruth
was
were
Ruth's
married.
husband.
Right, okay, so...
But it was Ruth and Matt.
Then Uncle Lyle, of course, and he didn't marry until later, when he married
No.
Aunt Frances. He was older when he married, and Lorette, and then Dad, and you two. Now, were there any children that were that didn't survive birth? All the children grew up.
Any that were what?
You didn't have any children in the family that were stillborn or died in infancy.
No, not that I know of.
All pretty healthy.
But when Alice left him, he came, brought Dick, and Mom had to practically raise him, right?
Yeah. He wasn't
He
easy
was
to
a fire.
raise
He had a
either.
little temper like from his mother.
Oh.
Wouldn't be from any of us.
Well, she was, his mother was a very hard person to get along with. Mom tried her best to not have Clifford marry her, but he did. So,
Got a
pair of shoes.
Oh, she do
She
that.
threw a shoe out of one time.
Huh?
She threw a shoe out of one
Shoe.
Who was that, Alice?
Alice,
she
that was
had
Alice.
And she threw a shoe at Lyle?
Yeah, she got mad at him about something.
Lyle was teasing her about
Oh,
something.
of course, Uncle Lyle never teased anyone.
Maybe he deserved it. I don't know.
So he didn't deserve her to treat him. So that was a worry we had. I think we survived it.
Now we're going to do some stories about the children, us, Jim and Susie and I. Since primarily the tape is for our family. But
About who's this going to be?
about Susie
Oh,
and Jim and I.
Oh,
Do you remember anything about the year Susie stayed with you, ladies, and worked at PT before she went off to Bob Jones?
yeah.
Maybe some of her driving escapades?
Well,
Or getting
Lyle-
dressed? Didn't Uncle Lyle teach her to drive?
Yes, I think so.
He was a patient man.
Lyle would tell you kids he was taking you out to show you a mound, a big mound. And you believed it was a big mound.
How did he take you out on the other side of West Liberty?
For an Indian mound?
Lyle was always telling
Did you ever get a picture of the house where we lived in West Liberty?
No.
You ought to get a picture of that sometime. Our dad and mother had that house built.
Hmm.
There was
Yeah.
one picture of us that was taken in that year. Did you see that in that book?
No.
He had that house. They had that house built. And of course, Dad was
Mildred. We'll get it later.
Dad was working at the at mines. Well, that was at Dearden at the time, Dearden Mines, and they had that house built. And it was a nice house.
2-story.
It had a big house. It had about 4 bedrooms. It had a nice. You came in a hallway, and you went up the steps, and then there was a nice living room and a dining room and kitchen. It was a real nice house. Well, that's where Jim was born, wasn't it? No,
Bill.
That's where Bill was born, because Dr. Cooper was the doctor, and I'd been hounding him about having. I said, "You bring babies to everybody else's house." I said, "Why don't you bring a baby to our
Eileen
house?"
was just crazy.
I was 9 years old
Yeah.
when Bill was born. I didn't know how babies came. I just
We didn't know where they came from.
yeah. I said, "You bring babies to everybody else." I said, "The people down the
She
deer."
had the nerve to tell this.
I told the doctor, told Dr. Cooper, and I said, "Why don't you ever bring a baby to our house?" "Well," he said, "I'll tell you." He said, "Some of those were Italians and some were colored." Well, I don't think he had many colored babies.
Oh,
He said, "You wouldn't want a baby like that," he said, "at your house." And I said, "Well, no, but I said, you bring other people a nice baby."
I think you thought he just went out and picked up a baby and brought it.
I was dumb.
So what, did he say anything to you when you
So
finally got a baby?
When Bill was born, he was born early in the morning. And he said to Pop, one day after the delivery and everything, he said, "Now, I want to get over there," he said, and
Get those girls
get
up.
those girls up. He said, "I want that one in particular to see that I brought her a baby." I was
We
9
thought
years
they just
old.
came in the air.
So
You did. I was beginning
So
to kind of suspicion.
I can remember Mrs. Skidmore, the lady that was there when Mom was delivered. She was sitting downstairs with the baby, because we had one of these furnaces that had a big
Because it was in January.
had one register, and she had the baby there, and she was bathing him. And old Doc Cooper said, now I want you to see that you got a baby. And he said, "I want you to take good care of it, because," he said, "it's the last one you're getting." Oh, I could see him as a plane. And we had one of these big registers, And she was there with the baby.
Dad wasn't working. I guess they were.
Maybe they were on strike at it.
They were on strike, and Dad wasn't working, so he had scrubbed the kitchen floor, cleaned. He was.
Oh,
cleaning.
that was another time.
Well,
Mom
anyway.
was sick.
He.
Mom had the flu or something.
And so the doctor, when he came, Dad called to him and he said,
He thought it was us kids coming.
he says, "Wipe your feet before you come in."
I
And
said,
Dad,
"I just scrubbed the floor."
that Dad said that, see. And he said, "Oh, never mind." He said, and here it happened to be the doctor instead of
Oh.
us. He said, "Wipe your feet." He said, "I wiped my feet before I came
He said,
in."
"I left my rubbers at the gate."
All those things were so funny,
Well, the Vines was on strike, and
So,
he wasn't working.
I wiped my feet.
Dr. Cooper never got over that.
Dad thought it was us coming home from school.
Now, where did the name Wallman come from?
What?
Wasn't their family name Wallman? Jim is James Wallman Monroe.
Oh,
That was a cousin of our
cousin
dad's.
of ours.
That was their last name?
See, our
Wallman.
dad's mother's maiden name was Wallman.
Oh, okay.
And yes, it was Dave Wallman, was a cousin of Dad's,
Arch.
and Arch Wallman. Well, then Dad had a brother, Arch. Dad had a brother, Arch Monroe, that managed the company store at Rossiter. and he came to our house quite often because, well, he's the one that Aunt Lizzie kept house for. But of course, he hadn't got moved after he got located at this store at Rossiter. So he often would come to our house. And he was a real big-hearted guy.
On a Sunday.
On a Sunday. He'd bring us oranges and candy, stuff from the store.
We thought he was great. He was. He was Dad's brother.
Well, it's just interesting to know where that name came from.
See, Uncle Arch's wife died during the delivery of Charles. And so Aunt Lizzie wasn't married, so she just went and kept house for Uncle Arch and raised Charles. So, of course, Charles was just like her own.
Mm-hmm. That happened frequently in those days, didn't it?
What?
Happened frequently in those days where a woman wouldn't survive childbirth.
She died in childbirth.
He is questioning us as though we were going to join the army.
You are fit for the army, aren't you? Then you were going to tell about, what was the story we mentioned? Okay, we were going to mention some of the stories that related to our childhood, and you mentioned that
some of the stories about what?
Our childhood.
I gotta go and get a drink first before I tell.
Okay, we'll take a time out then.
Lucille, that's when we were living on South Main Street.
Okay, next we're going to move on to some of the stories of our childhood, and you'd mentioned about, I know, Aunt Mildred, you know about the story when I got my tonsils out.
Oh.
Do you remember that story?
Mildred knows that.
You picked me up, I think, that day from the hospital, didn't you? And I wanted some special food. Remember that story?
What was that? When David got his tonsils out.
I was there officiating?
No, you picked me up that day from the hospital.
Oh.
And you brought me home and gave me a special treat. I wanted some milk toast. Do you remember that?
Oh.
You don't remember that?
Were we living on where? Here?
Here. Yeah. Then another one when I had gone in to get my teeth worked on in the hospital, I guess a couple teeth extracted. You were there that day helping Dr. Anthony.
Yeah.
Do you remember that? I went into they wheeled me into the operating room and you were there and Dr. Anthony was there and I looked up at the drill.
I don't remember.
Yeah, remember that one? I looked up at the drill and said, "It's that there thing that I don't like."
The
and we were
drill.
yeah, the drill.
Oh yes, I remember her telling about that. You saying it's that thing that I don't like.
And what about Mrs. Stump? You were talking about a story a little earlier, or Mrs. Stump in the cafeteria at Big Run.
Oh, that's time.
Oh, you
Didn't have my money.
you started to get your food.
You didn't
You
have
walk-
the money.
And all of a sudden you said, "Oh, Mrs. Stump, I forgot my money."
I pulled a boat.
I put a boo-boosh.
I can remember this.
And she said, "Well, now, dear David, what did you do?" She said, "You were always doing something."
She thought you were such a nice little guy.
And she said, "Now, David, what did you do?" And he says, "Oh, Mrs. Stump, I forgot my money." She says, "You just go right ahead and get your food. You can bring me the money tomorrow." She was in charge of the cafeteria.
Now, wasn't it her dessert that David liked so much?
Cherry cobbler. She
Yeah.
had a delicious
What
cherry
was that?
cobbler.
Yeah, she'd make that cherry cobbler, and he thought that was the greatest.
And then wasn't it Mrs. Stump that saw me across on the roof?
Oh, she called your mother, and she said, "Oh, David's out in the roof," and she says, "I think he's gonna jump any minute."
Well, he says, "I jump. I jump."
Yeah, you was going like this. I jump.
Oh, brother.
What did I have on that day?
I don't know.
Didn't I have a cape?
I suppose something that looked like wings. I don't know, but
You'd have thought we had our own kids the way we were trying to take care of them all.
oh, I tell you.
But she rescued me, or Mom did, I guess, huh?
I guess Yes, your mother did.
So I remember.
You was there, and she called and she said, "Oh, I think David's just ready to jump off of the roof." Well, she knew if you jumped off of the roof, then you'd get hurt.
Killed himself, likely. She said, "Stay right where you are." Then how did they get him down?
Oh, I don't know that.
Well, we had that
I
steps
suppose-
right at the side of the house. You could just go over the roof up to the second floor.
I suppose he could get down himself if he got up there.
You see what we went through raising our children? It must have been after Bill was born. And so she was, she was the nicest old lady. And she treated us just like we were her kids. And anyway, we were doing the dishes this evening, and we had the cupboards came down, and then there was a little shelf. And I was putting.
But when you opened the door, if you opened the door and dishes were on there, why?
The dishes fell out and broke. And I
You
cried.
broke several plates.
And Mrs. Skidmore put her arm around me and she said, "Honey, don't cry." She said, "There's lots of more paper, more dishes that cup, you could, in other words, you could fill it in."
Really easy replace.
Oh,
Now,
I
this
thought
Mrs. Skidmore lived with you?
Well, no, she was there.
She was a lady that
Help her.
Help Mom. Yeah.
remember Bill or Clifford went on the streetcar to get her.
Yeah. She lived in DuBois.
She was in DuBois, but she was the sweetest old lady.
It used to be the streetcars run from West Liberty.
These kids will think we were born back in the mom.
back in the way. But the streetcar run from DuBois to, David, when you go out there, this road that's out there where the blinker, we call it the blinker light.
Mm-hmm.
You know where
Yes.
that is? Well, if you went out straight on that road, there's a house on the corner. Well, Johnson Motors, where they have their cars. Well, then you go out, and there's a house there on the left-hand side. And if you go down straight, it's a cemetery, and we used to get the streetcar across from that cemetery to go to DuBois.
Oh.
And the streetcar run, I don't know, a good many times a day. Of course, people didn't have cars like they do now. Everybody has a car. And if we wanted to go to DuBois, why, that's the way we'd go. And it was a real bitter cold day when Bill was born. And Mrs. Nicholson was a good friend of Mom's. So she went to DuBois that morning after Bill was born, after she knew he was born, and got flowers for Mom. It's a wonder the flowers didn't freeze because
all this way she had to wade.
she had to walk and wade snow from where the streetcar lived to up where our house, because you'd come up and the schoolhouse was on the one side and our house was clear down on the quite a little distance. But she went and got flowers and brought them to Mom.
That was thoughtful.
Yeah, she
Some
was.
great things happened in our young lives.
Robert.
My dad passed away in July the 5th, 1937. That was a shock because he'd been sick, but he had a bad heart. He passed away 9 days, and Uncle George was there that day. I wasn't there the day he died. I was out running around, which I should have been home, but I wasn't, so yeah, he passed away.
Had he had heart attacks before?
He'd had heart trouble, it's hard for back. Then
He was in his 60s, wasn't
he was 68, 69, he was 69. He passed away. And I worked at the mines 14 and a half years. And the second time, in 1937, the mine was shutting down. And, so I was buying a few cars out of Pittsburgh. So I
You
knew
mean
that
57?
57. I was buying a few cars out of Pittsburgh. So I was second on the list, or they was going to shut down. They were going to keep one cage, and the other cage was put on me. older than me in sonority, Bob Peace. So I told Maury, I said, well, I don't have a job, I guess. No, he said, you won't have it. So they were pulling out their equipment. I wasn't crazy about it. So anyhow, I started to buy a few cars. When the mine shut down, I got dealer's plates and started the business. I sold a lot of cars. 1937 to
57.
1957, 1968, or 1971, and I went to work for Merge.
Tell about the time when Jim got his first ticket.
Oh, well, one time we were down in Pittsburgh, and we had a car down there at Thatcher Ford, and we'd taken a car down there to come down in, and taken a 33 Ford, 53 Ford to go down in. So I had a tow bar, and I told Jim, well, you never drove on a tow bar. I said, you be careful, you take it home then. So I said, the speed limit's 50 miles an hour then. So I didn't say nothing more about him. So he'd go up the road, there's 65 miles an hour, and this cop that was down there in Wilbridge Township.
Monroeville?
Out of Monroeville there. He was on the ball, So he caught him going 65. So the ticket was only $15 at that time. So when I got home, he said, I have something for you. I said, what is it? He said, a ticket. I said, what do you get a ticket for? He said, well, it's going 65. The cop stopped me. I said, you're going 65, throwing that car in a bar. I said, that's crazy, man. So he said, you'll pay the ticket for it. I said, you pay it. Won't teach you anything if I pay it. So he paid the ticket. He didn't like it, but he paid it.
Jim really
Did
became.
you tell the cop that that was your dad, that was dad that was coming or something?
Well, the cop said, well, I don't care who's coming.
His dad was following him.
But I didn't, he was going before I got up there. I didn't even know until I got home.
Are you warm, Jim?
Jim is really your right hand.
Well, I don't think
Listen, girls.
that's okay. I don't mind.
So Jim and I one time were going down to
Manheim.
So we were taking a Buick convertible down there. I had a nice car, but I couldn't sell it. It was quite 58. So I went around there at Phillipsburg, got around the first half circle, and the cops stopped me about 3 o'clock in the morning. So he chewed me out for, I wasn't going fast. He chewed me out for not stopping at a little sign there or something. And so I didn't argue with him. He let me go, but it was one of those things. So we went down to Manheim and sold a Buick.
I remember that one, a gray one.
Yeah, nice car.
Jim was your right-hand man there in the business for a long time.
The thing about it, Jim was, now I shouldn't say this on TV, but Jim was a great operator, but he wasn't too fast on the working part. He liked to goof off, but that's just the way it was.
He was only 16.
He was a salesman, still is.
What about Susie's learning to drive? All you folks have some stories about that.
She learned to drive. And when she took a car one time, she was working as a cashier up her side. So he took an Oldsmobile of mine up there, and she backed into a guy with a new car, just and scraped the door about that much on a new Oldsmobile. So this guy called me up and he said, "You have insurance?" I said, Yes, I have insurance. I said, "What's the name of the company?" I said, "Well, I'm not going to tell you the name of the company. I'll fix the car." Take it up to Arizona, so he fixed it for $8 just to scratch. He didn't going to make a big case out of it. But anyhow, it was just nothing. She was learning to drive, and she was all excited about it. She backed into this guy.
I talked a few minutes about Grandma Munro, and I remember several things that were very pointed about her. One was how active she was right on up through her 80s, and I remember her making bread in her 80s. I also remember what she always used to do when she had a 7-Up float. You remember that? Whenever she'd get to the bottom of a 7-Up float, That was one of her favorites, how she'd take the straw. Her hearing was getting hard. Can you remember that?
What'd she say?
How when she'd have a drink with a straw, and she'd get at the bottom of the glass, and it would, you know how it does when you get to the bottom of the glass when there's nothing in it, but the straw would make it the noise.
That loud sucking noise. Yeah, she would do that. Well, then as she got older, 95 or so, she began to really slow down, right?
She was what?
She began to slow down, and
Oh yeah.
She didn't slow down too much, I think.
She lacked 5 months of being 100.
mm-hmm.
She died.
So were there some events that prompted her having to be in bed? Those last couple of years? Were there some events that prompted
Just
her
ran
having
out
to...
of gas, you might say. And I remember one time I was going down to Greenville, South Carolina, when you kids were down there. And I'd taken a Pontiac, and Lucille was going along, and her and I and Lucille, I think Mildred was going along. And I said to her, I didn't intend it, I hadn't figured on staying all night, 600 and some miles. And anyhow, I said to her, I think I'll drive right through, Mom. She said, it's okay with me. And she was about 93 years old at that time.
Tell about that time, Dad, when you picked up that old 48 Dodge from Jim down there, and how you came back. Wasn't that real bad weather?
He traded a Dodge in down there, and he had a Ford of mine, he sold it. And he traded his old Dodge, 48 Dodge. I said, well, run home. Oh, yeah. So I went down to get it. Of course, it didn't have an inspection, and it didn't have a title. In Pennsylvania, you got to have a title. It didn't have a title. So I put dealer plates on it and ran it home. And anyhow, I got it started in the morning. We stayed down at Wilson's all night. And that was down in Spartansburg, up from Greenville. So I got the thing started because it had poor compression. It turned over the starter, but it wouldn't start. So I finally got it started after it run all day. And it used oil. I dumped a couple quarts of oil in when it was running to keep the oil level up. Old 48 Dodge. So we went up there and we got up. They cut across the road from up around place. Cut across the road anyhow on the Macadam Road, and it was hilly. So I couldn't get up one hill. So Lucille got in the back seat and jumped up and down. And so to make it...
Didn't you tell her to do that, though?
Yes, the thing would go ahead a little bit. And so it went ahead, and I finally got up the hill. And then I put air and stopped the service and put air in the tires, left some air out of the back tire. So I got over the hill. We got home about 4 o'clock that morning. And I couldn't sell the car. I gave it to Chuck Coons. I said, there's a car you can have. I don't want it. I can't sell it. I can't have it around. So he messed around with it. I don't know what he did with it.
Well, didn't Mom see you laughing at her when she was jumping up and down?
I laughed a little bit, and she kind of got PO'd at that. So I was working at Kramer, and I was fooling around with cars. I had this old Dakota convertible. And I put this and that and all, and everything could go wrong with it. So I sold the guy, and still putting that in the paper, and I said, do you sell that car? Anybody come to you buy, sell that car today? So she said, I come home from work. She said, I sold the car. The guy's coming to get in the morning. So she said, I got a $20 each bud, so she sold it for $3.50. And so I said, boy, I hope that car runs for that. I said, it's enough of the trouble for me. So I seen the guy about 6 months later. He said, boy, Bill, that's the best car I ever had. Never had no trouble. I must have had everything fixed on it. But I fixed, putting brakes on it and ground the valves and, this and that and the other thing. I was down at Bob Jones. He come home on Christmas. So I had a 60 Oldsmobile. They had a couple cars over at State College. And we had to go and get it. So we were going up over to Clearfield, up the hill to State College. So we were chatting away over the Anthony's Crossing there, and we just, the lights there, we weren't paying no attention. And we crossed in front of the flower, and he'd come up there, woo, and whistled and scared the life out of us. And I said, now there, both of us have been killed. And he said, how could those dummies cross that crossing and not look? We were just talking, wasn't paying attention.
Oh, the Lord protected you.
He sure did. we still had a little pinto, and the gas gauge, from the time we got it new, and when it was a quarter full, it was empty. So I told her now, I give her $5. The gas was hard to get. I said, you get gas and that, get $5. Herman Reed was going to do was, go ahead and go, but get $5 worth of gas in that car, because it'll run out when it's a quarter full. She never heard, never paid no attention. So about 11 o'clock at night, the phone rang. And she said, this is Susan. We're out here up here at John Churfish. We're out of gas. We're stopping. He said, we're out of gas. And you don't have any gas. Well, I said, did you put gas in it? No, she said. Was I supposed to? I said, I give you $5 and to put gas in it. Well, she said, I forgot it. I spent it for shopping. So I said, well, I don't have any gas, so I don't know what I'll do. So I'll come up and get it. So I went and got it. Got some gas the next day and brought it home. I told her about that. She never even thought it. She forgot it. They won't run out of gas.
Do you remember the story, Aunt Mildred and Eileen, we were just talking about a minute ago, where Jim ran your Ford out of gas on the way to Hershey? That was that old 56 Ford that green went in.
Yes,
I still remember we got up to the top of the hill, and then we had to...
I forget how far back he had to go to get gas.
Weren't you telling him right along he needed gas?
Yeah, we said, now remember this gauge isn't working right. So I guess he didn't pay too much attention to it. So
He's right
got
over
out of Hershey a little ways, and we run out of gas. So he had to walk back to get gas, and we had to wait there in the car to leave.
Those were the good old days.
Nothing good about that.
Good old days.
This run out of gas is ridiculous.
Do you remember...
I keep my car full of gas. You're down to half a film up.
Well, we were young. You should have just been sure we had gas.
Well, our gas gauge
That wasn't
don't
your
work
car.
right now.
I wasn't driving the car.
Is it on?
I'm adding a few things here to this, too. All of us, by the way, are unshaven today, so we don't always look like this, but sometimes we look worse.
Yes.
I remember a couple of times when Susie and I were both at Bob Jones that we made our trips back and forth. And Susie, dear heart that she was, always had a reputation for her driving. And so one night we were driving, I remember it was very clearly, it was a 62 Mercury. I had,
Oh, that's the one I sold to John Wall.
and it was just a super nice car.
Oh, yes, it was.
And it was about 2 in the morning. We were driving down through Virginia, and I said to Susie, I'm just so tired, Susie. You're going to have to drive. And she said, sure. She was a night owl. She could stay up all night. And so she got behind the wheel, and I went to sleep right away. And as soon as I went to sleep, I must have really been tired because I was out. But I don't know how long it was, but after a period of time, I kind of woke up, and in the fog there of my own mind, I realized that I could hear the motor racing in this car. Well, you're not supposed to hear the motor racing in a Mercury. They're supposed to be nice and quiet. And I looked
She
over.
had a new voice.
No, I looked over at the speedometer, and it was over 85, 90. And Susie was just singing along, driving, hum-da-dum-dum-da-dee-dee-dee, just drive. He had no idea that she was going 85 or 90. He said, Susie, what are you doing? She said, I'm just driving. I said, pull over, you're going too fast. And so she pulled the car over, and I said, I'll drive now. And so I drove for a while. Well, then, same night, I got, again, so tired I just couldn't continue to drive. So I said, now, Susie, I'm going to let you drive again, but you have to promise that you're going to watch your speed. Okay, David, I'll watch my speed. So she drove for about another hour, and we came to a fork in the road where we were to turn right. And just about 100 yards in front of this turn, she said, David, which way do I turn? Well, again, I was in a dead sleep, and I woke up, and I looked at these signs, and I just couldn't remember which way we were to turn. So just at the last minute, I remembered and figured out where we were, and I said, turn right. And so by that time, it was too late for Susie to register on her computer what to do. So she didn't go right, left, she didn't go right, she just went straight. And so she slammed on the brakes and went straight. And so we stopped right at that crux of the Y. We didn't go right or go left. I said, Susie, I'll drive now. And she didn't get another opportunity to drive the rest of the evening. Our childhood, whenever we were growing up, Jim being 5 years older than Susie and I, was always the boss. He was often in charge when we left. When we were left alone with him. Mom and Dad went out somewhere. Jim was in charge. Well, when Jim was a sophomore in high school, he broke his leg. And even though Susie and I didn't miss his bossing us around, yet we did miss him. And I think had we been honest at that time, we would have admitted that. But he came home with his cast on his leg up to his thigh. I can remember as a kid waking up a couple nights and that cast being laying on top of me inside, of course, covering his leg. And I was much smaller than he was at that time, so I was pinned to the bed and I couldn't get up. But one evening he was babysitting, and we thought, well, now he's babysitting us and he has a broken leg. So Susie and I kind of thought that we could do what we wanted. So he started to tell us to do something. I said, I don't have to listen to you anymore because you're laid up here and you can't get around and chase us. And so he got up from the sofa and chased me around the dining room table and pinned me up against the wall. He was on one side of the table, I was on the other side, and he pinned me up against the wall with his crutch. And at that point, I said, okay, I'll do whatever you tell me. I think it may have even been the same night that he told me to get downstairs and fix the fire, because it was the wintertime.
Where did this happen?
On Pennsylvania Avenue.
When they lived on.
And we had a large register in the center of the house that was the only register for the whole house.
Furnace.
Yeah, central coal furnace. But the way he could measure whether the furnace was fixed right and whether there was a good fire in there was a good amount of heat coming up. The heat would rise. And so I went down to fix the fire, and Jim told Susie to stand on the register. She had a dress on. And the way that it was determined that the fire was fixed properly was that her dress just filled up with heat. And, she had like a big petticoat on underneath, and it was only the heat coming up and making the dress full. So I fixed the fire well because Susie's dress filled up with all that air that was coming up from downstairs. But there were many times that there were difficulties like that, sibling rivalry. But probably the biggest thing was that when all of us went away to Bob Jones and were saved, then that made a big difference in our own personal relationships from the time that we were kids and had all those inward fightings to the time when we really did love each other and developed a real love and compassion for one another and concern for one another's spiritual and physical welfare also. That just really transformed our sibling relationship.
He was a super boss.
Yes,
he
at
was a
times.
super boss.
Down in South Carolina, started on my Lincoln. I had a 60 Lincoln was driving. I asked Jim, I said, where can I get that fixed? He said, Lincoln Electric down there. He was in school with him. And he said, Lincoln Electric, they're good guys. They'll fix it for you. So I went down and they fixed it. They had to jack up the motor, quite a job to get the starter off. Moved to get the motor off the mounts, So they took the starter off and rewound the armature and put brushes in it. Fixed it, did a good job. And so I wanted to pay him. I said, how much is it? He said, $63. So I got out a check and started to fill out. He said, where's the check from? I said, Pennsylvania. He said, no, I can't take the check. I said, well, I don't have any way to pay you. So Jim said, well, I'll give my check and you can mail it to me. So that's what I did. So after that, I got a Visa card. I used to have a Visa card. And by the way, they'll take them any place. You go to all these other cards, they won't take them any place. A lot of places won't take them.
Greta.
This guy, an Italian guy, I forget his name, was Sestito. He was, I went in the restaurant there, was before one of the meetings. Just went in. And he said, hi, Monroe. He shook hands with me. And I said, oh, Sestito, yeah. He said, you remember me? I said, yeah, I took you up to the stockade. He was working for me. I took him up to the stockade. And they told me, if he gets away, you have to serve a sentence, which is not true. But anyhow, he said, if I had tried to escape, he said, you really shot me on the train, you was that. I said, yeah, I would have. Well, he said, oh, I don't think. I said, well, why didn't you run and try it? He didn't run. Anyhow,
He was court-martialed?
He was court-martialed. He got 3 years, but I said, that was only a couple of years after the war. I said, you're out already. Oh, he said, it only kept me about 6 months.
You said that when you went over, there was how many in your platoon, or what do you have?
No, there's not. our section was, our mortar section.
Did you say one time 63? Would that
63 men, yeah. 63.
What do you
And
mean
how
in
many?
a court-martialed?
It's just like a civilian trial. You shoot somebody in a civilian trial, civilian life, they arrest you and put you in a trial. A court-martial in the Army, that's the Army way.
It's a military trial,
Military.
and you can be convicted. But then, out of those 63 men, how many returned?
Well, there's 17 left after the bulge. Now, not all of those were killed. Some of them were wounded and went to other companies, because if you got wounded, they usually sent you another outfit. There were 17 men left in the original men in our
17 men unwounded and unkilled.
Yeah,
I mean,
serving
one shot.
serving.
Then, how many people were in the division, the 99th Division?
3,290 people.
3,290.
Hey, brother.
That's three regiments, service companies, and all that.
This is the conclusion of the family rambling history of the Munros. We haven't really attempted to do anything that is on a long-term basis of really being chronologically in order. We're just trying to give a series of stories that convey many of the things that we've heard over the years. Some of the stories were ones that Dad had told, and some of the ones are stories from Aunt Mildred and Aunt Eileen that we've heard. But we're doing this when Aunt Mildred is 88 and Dad is 75, 76, almost 88. She'll be 88 August 12th. And Aunt Eileen is 82. Aunt Eileen, how old are you now? 82?
85.
82.
He's 85.
85. So we're attempting to just accumulate a number of the stories that we have heard over the years and to put them down in a tape in a fashion
Hey, John, come here.
that can be able to be remembered. And we're sorry for the distractions in the background here at our conclusion. Folks, listen, everybody, shh. So, Jim and Susie, this has been made in order to give you this as a Christmas present so that you can have a video memory of many of these things that we have heard as a family. So we've got to hear about Old Coon and all the other stories that we heard as children. And so to you, from us, Jim, we deeply appreciate you as a brother, and Susie, we're very, very grateful for such a wonderful sister as you. And this is something that you'll have for a lifetime to be able to remember many of these. This is the home in DuBois where Aunt Mildred and Aunt Eileen and Grandma Munro moved when they first came to DuBois. We had many memories here. This is also the home where Dad came home from the war. And just down the street is the home of the ladies that they mentioned in the tape, and the iron fence where we had so many of our pictures taken as children. You can see over there the iron fence very clearly in the picture. A number of us had our pictures taken here. Remember Jim and Susie and I on a number of occasions being at that iron fence getting our picture taken. This is the home Grandpa Munro, that's James Munro, husband of Blanche, built in 1909 or 1910. Aunt Eileen was just 6 months old when this house was completed, and the family lived here for a number of years. My dad, Bill, was born in this home. This entrance here on the left was the main entrance to the home, and this was a hallway where which became the main entrance to the home, of course, and then went upstairs or downstairs. And a doorway here on the right, just visible to the right of the main picture window, was a doorway to the dining room. Just up the road from here, about 200 yards, was a schoolhouse and the children walked up the road here to the school, which still stands but is in poor repair. House where the children attended. As you can see now, of course, it's in repair.
Be doing it over, doing some work on it. Wonder what
This is
they're
just
gonna
about
use
a
it
quarter
for.
of a mile from the family home. This is the church just about 200 feet from the school where the family attended church in those early years of the 1900s. This is the Munro home in Big Run on Church Street, where after the family moved from West Liberty to the farm out in eastern Pennsylvania, they moved back here to Big Run approximately 1923, 1924, in that neighborhood, and lived in this home for approximately 20 years. Of course, this was beside the street that went up to the cemetery, as we're seeing here now. But the home was resident to the Munro family for a number of years. When we were growing up in Big Run, this was the Graham residence. This is a picture of the home in Big Run where the Munro family, Bill, Lucille, Jim, David, and Susan lived from about 1957 to around 1970, 72 in that neighborhood when Bill and Lucille moved to Punxsutawney. Beside this was the Keller residence, and then beside our home was the home of Ted and Jeanette Freese. This is the Big Run Public School, where many of us went to school. Jim, Susie, and I all did our elementary school here, and Aunt Mildred and Dad and Aunt Eileen and some of the others graduated from high school here. We're at the cemetery now in Big Run where Grandma and Grandpa Ryder are buried, and beside them is Laval's grave, David L. Distance from their graves is the grave of my mother's brother, who died at 3 years old. I can remember her speaking of him occasionally. And beside an infant son that passed away at childbirth. We stand in the cemetery at Big Run again. It's interesting to note that there are many names that are quite familiar as you look across the cemetery and see a number of the family names that were familiar to us while we were growing up. This is the First Christian Church in Big Run, where the family attended church for many years.